Pranam Raghu, thank you so much once again. A privilege to be with you in
Uh,
dialogue in our ongoing series.
yeah, you ask interesting questions, Abhishek, so you keep me coming back.
Thank you so much, Raghu. Raghu, I'll come directly to the point where we are. It's a really tough time for us. COVID is all around, and currently there is a panic, there is sadness, there is anxiety, and this is at some stage also going to calm down, and we're going to go back. And there's already a lot of prophecies about going back, the great reset, the new normal. People are already predicting all sorts of things about getting back. And as a generation, I think we're very confused about how do we make sense of this? What do we get back to as a normal? Will it be the same old? How will it look different? What can we learn from our wisdom in the past to respond to this kind of crisis? So a whole set of questions are coming up, and I wanted to locate this also in our Indian context, because this is also a part of a series around rediscovering India, understanding the Indian mind, decolonizing. And my fear is that our responses may still be very conditioned responses that we may do. So just want to open up with this question of your initial responses on what's happening and what does it mean and what do we do?
Yeah, to start with, Abhishek, I will probably, hopefully, be gone of natural causes long before the reactions to the COVID set in and the new norm or whatever reset, whatever you call it, really gets going. Yeah. The reason why I'm saying that is um, when we look back at several events that have happened, right? We've had a Spanish flu, people keep talking about it. We've had the world wars. We've had, a fair number of catastrophes that the earth has had to bear because of human stupidities, right? So if we look back at many of these things, it's important that we understand how have people dealt with it and what has happened after those events, right? Now, most of these events, if not all of them, have pushed uh, the world or whichever parts of the world there has been conflict in or famine problems in into a state of scarcity, right? Huge amounts of scarcity and things like that. Now, I'm just reminded of a very interesting conversation I had with one of my teachers called Swami Tathatha, right? He was talking about the difference between fasting, starving, and deprivation. Okay, I thought it was a very, very insightful conversation, and I think it's be useful to remember it and bring it back at this point. He described fasting as a process where I voluntarily stop consuming things. Okay, food, let's say. But this not consuming creates certain reactions in me. So I learn how to be meditative, mindful, and watch my entire relationship with the things that I stop consuming. Okay, so in the Hindu, the older practices, we had something called Chaturmasya, four, supposed to be 4 months. Some people say it's 4 15-day periods where you stop eating something step by step by step. And towards the end of this, you go on a pilgrimage. So the entire period is a period of fasting, and other cultures also have this period of fasting, right? Now, if you engage with this lack of consumption from a mindful, attentive space, you learn a lot about yourself, you regain health, right? There are lots of positives, but fundamentally, it's a period of meditative wakefulness and understanding what is your relationship with what you consume. Yeah. Then there is something called starving, where there's a lack of something and you're not voluntarily going through it, but the main difference is you react to it. You react to the fact that you don't have it, you're craving for it, and your mind goes through all kinds of reactivities because you don't have it. So not only is that period not healing or healthful for you personally in any way, the moment you come out of that period of starving, you just gorge, right?
Yes.
You can see this amongst people who go through a starvation diet because they want to lose weight or something like that. Immediately after they come out of that diet, they'll go and eat badly, eat a hell of a lot. They haven't learned anything. There is no relationship with food that has been worked. Yeah. And then, of course, there is deprivation. Yeah. And uh, in deprivation, it's much more prolonged, it's much more forced, and there are some structural issues around deprivation, and that causes its own angst, its own kind of rage and anger, and so on. Right. Now we have to ask ourselves how many people going through the COVID period right now and all its difficulties, how many of them understand a relationship with this, which could be called fasting?
Mm.
How many are experiencing starvation, right? And how many are getting their deprivations accentuated? So post COVID will reflect this, right? And even in the small period after the first wave, the next phase we saw, yeah, there was a mad rush for things that people haven't had during their 5 6 months of lockdown or whatever. So
Yes.
what is going to happen is very, very possible that uh, consumption is going to be pushed, and it'll be pushed in the name of GDP,
Mm.
right? And GDP is a colonizing project, right? So we need to understand this a little more carefully. And I think personally for me, the hope in the future lies if human beings can get to the indigenous cultures that existed before the period of colonization that has hit us. See, most people don't realize that colonization and modernity are just two sides of the same coin.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
And the so called rich nations of today, which flaunt their wealth and everybody wants to be like the US or whatever, have all grown through on the backs of intense exploitation in a period of colonization, right? So this has to be understood. So if after the COVID, right, indigenous thought patterns, which are fundamentally polytheistic, as opposed to the European mind, the Roman mind, which is monotheistic. Unless there is a shift away from this paradigm, I don't see a real regeneration of the earth possible. I don't see real wellness possible.
Yeah, there are several ideas there, and I'm hoping that people who are listening to this have also heard our previous conversations so that
Mhm.
they are able to unpack many of these. But just to rephrase, you're saying that after COVID, there may be a thrust on consumption in the name of GDP as a way of just us copying the same old ways of doing things.
It's already no, it's already being discussed. No, how much GDPs are being uh, pushed down and how they expected recovery and what they expect as the percentage of how fast we will recover, and all this discourse has already started.
So, Raghu, just to understand the link between this, and you made a link between polytheistic and monotheistic religions, if you can share a bit about that link.
I'm not
Uh,
talking about monotheistic religions per se, Abhishek. I'm talking about monotheistic thought.
The way of thinking itself.
way of thinking. Like, for example, a lot of people who claim to be scientists are not scientific minded at all, because science fundamentally is polytheistic. It looks at truths, it looks at many truths, it says, let us examine many truths. But what has taken over the world is not science, but scienticism,
Right. Science as a
where
religion now.
science is pushed as another religion,
Hmm. Hmm.
as another monotheistic thought. So it will attack everything that's so called non scientific. And that attack itself is fundamentally not from a scientific mind. It's not from a mind that is in inquiry. It's from a mind that wants to gain control because of its hold, a hegemony of knowledge that it holds. Yeah, let's just look at this a little more carefully. Okay. See, if you're, what do we mean by a polytheistic culture? Let's say, right? It's a culture that has a respect for many truths. Okay, these are cultures where community is central. Many of them all across the world, if you look at them, time is looked at as rhythms, and there's a deep connection with nature when they're talking about time. Yeah, they look at ancestors as not departed souls or something like that, waiting, for God to decide whether they go to hell or not, right? They look at our ancestors and archetypal heroes as spirits which are living amongst us in the here and now, right? And the mark of a hero in all of these cultures is somebody who can respond from compassion to the community, right? Joseph Campbell has spoken about it. There are other people who understood mythology who've spoken about it, right? And the most important thing in these, you know, when you have a polytheistic mind or when you have a polytheistic culture is, if you're different from me, right, it evokes curiosity, it evokes mutuality of respect. So I'm not saying my truth versus your truth, but there's a certain kind of exchange that becomes possible, right? So you can see it in the way Sufism developed in India, whereas it was thrown out in its spaces of origin, right? So these are some of the characteristics of a polytheistic culture or a polytheistic mind.
Hmm.
Now let's kind of uh, do the Western binary creation,
Hmm.
okay, for a moment,
Right.
and look at, you know,
Monotheist.
polytheistic versus monotheistic.
Okay.
So a polytheistic culture will not
We'll never do.
get
Right.
it that way, but I think it's important to contrast it just to understand what are the possible differences. Yeah.
It's amazing that you are intentional even when you're doing that. That's so beautiful that you're saying for a moment, let's
Yeah,
have
we should
this.
have some fun while we can.
Yes, yes, yes.
So, what do monotheistic cultures say? They fundamentally say that there is one truth, and that is my truth. Okay, they're very, very sure about this. And at the current point of time, the way we see it now, individualism is is being pushed at the expense of community. Okay, so individuals become the basic element of the human collective. Time is defined as a linear flow, historicity, and so on. So, what does this do? It immediately says that old is bad and new is great and good. And this has been articulated by a lot of Western thinkers very clearly, right? All myths are supposed to be false, right? And what is it that is celebrated today? Yeah, it is greed and acquisition that is looked at as heroic, right? So these things are in very stark contrast to the polytheistic way of looking at things, right? And then the most important, when there is a difference, okay, if I'm operating from a monotheistic mind, difference is always dangerous Difference means I have to immediately compete with you, show you how my truth is better than your truth. I have to dominate you. If there's anything worthwhile in what you're doing, I have to extract it from you and put it into my terms. Otherwise, I cannot accept it, right? And finally, I either consume you or I destroy you. If I can dominate you and if I can keep drawing resources from you and make you a consumer, so I can keep the cycle of economic advantage going, you're useful to me, and so on. Otherwise, I don't care. I will destroy you. Now, this has been repeated over and over again. Iraq got bombed because of some oil issue, right? Libya gets bombed on some other excuse, right? This kind of response to the other is blatant. And this comes from a mind that is caught in monotheistic thought. And all monotheistic thinking patterns very clearly have a strong necessity to other and say only my thought should exist. It's fundamentally violent. Yeah. Right? So we need to really understand this well.
Yeah, I would also add, Raghu, that they place themselves in a position of superiority, right? Like literally moral superiority, intellectual, like almost like they have a right to do this. Like,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. See, my friend Kundan Singh has written a few papers on it and looked at it very carefully. He looks at it as a set of theorems and whatever, but his basic um, thesis is very, very simple and very clear, right? When he writes about colonization of the mind, right? He says that this Western monotheistic way of looking at the world, no, also does what is called creating binaries.
Hmm.
Okay. So what does it do? It creates a whole set of binaries: rationality versus irrationality, science versus spirituality. Yeah. Anything that is not science is superstition, right? Husbanding resources versus waste and wilderness, right? Perfection versus imperfection, good versus bad. Yeah. And after having defined, there are several such binaries. I mean, it's not, I'm just giving you a short.
Yes.
Yeah. Like science versus religion. And we know what happened in the Dark Ages and the Reformation. Yeah. And all of that in Europe. So these things are not just me versus you, just stated as, me, I don't like you. I just go out to kill you. Right. So these binaries are very, very violent inherently.
Hmm.
Then what do? Whichever part of this binary defines Western culture as you see it today, Roman culture as you see it today, European culture as you see it today, is always valorized and the other is shamed. Okay. And it's done in so many ways. Okay. I'm sure people have read about this whole thing of, the white man's burden. It was very clearly framed, saying, we are such great people. We need to civilize these uncivilized people. So please come. And the whole colonizing effort was premised on the idea of the white man's burden, right? And there was a famous picture. Okay. Robinson Crusoe is a story that really encompasses the white man's burden and this whole picture where this white guy standing up, and there's this black guy who's kneeling in front of him, and this guy is lifting him up. Okay, these were kind of advertising pictures types and stories, right? So this has been, and it's constant. It's happening even today, except that now it happens in a little more polished way. Yeah, so we'll come to that, but that's a very important part.
Yes,
Of
yes. I remember reading Phantom as comics where a white man in Africa beating
Tarzan.
up people, and like what was he
Tarzan.
doing there?
Yeah. Tarzan, white skin,
Tarzan.
Yeah, that's how
Okay.
that word is still this thing, huh?
Hmm, hmm,
And
hmm,
that entire process,
hmm, hmm,
right?
hmm.
And if you deconstruct Tarzan, he's a very violent guy. He's more violent than all the animals, but because he's a white guy, his violence is always projected as something for the good, and the violence of the other people is always projected as something that's ugly, filled with superstition, all of this. So this kind of propagation of a certain point of view, a monotheistic point of view, a monoculture point of view, has been going on for a long time. And it justified the whole of colonization and the horrors of colonization. I mean, ethnic cleansing that has happened, genocides that have happened in the name of colonization have all been whitewashed. Yeah.
Yeah. So Raghu, I had one uh,
Mhm.
question. I don't know if I can let me anyways put it in, and then maybe you can respond.
Mhm.
uh, it has two parts. One is it seems that the scarcity and fear seem to be the primary drivers of this monotheistic kind of thought, and like at deep within it seems to be a fear, or it's almost like fear which is driving that kind of a
Of course,
being. So I'm
yeah.
wondering what is at the,
See, we
is
can
it fear
speculate
or
on
what?
we can speculate on it. My speculation is that much of this kind of othering and whatever has come out of civilizations that have grown in spaces with scarcity, desert-like conditions. Even in India, people who come out of desert kind of contexts have a very strong in-group solidarity and out-group violence. Right? It's very interesting. I remember there was a small video clip that was floating around at one time where a Tamil guy, a farmer, is talking about something, right? And he very clearly articulates what colonization is all about. He says, "Look around me, right? How green my place is. I've always had plenty. So I've never had the need to go out of my country.
Hmm.
I've never had the need to go out somewhere and abharikarive means to exploit other people. I've got enough. Who are the people who have come here to exploit me?
Hmm. Hmm.
Those are people who didn't have enough,
Yeah. Yeah.
who are impoverished people, who come from impoverished geographies. They come here to take because they don't have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very simply, very beautifully articulated.
And I think this has gone so deep that now, even if they have, they're still acting out of the scarcity. Like they have more than enough, but they're still acting out the algorithm that is so deeply programmed, right? The
No, it's not.
acquisitive.
I don't think it's just a benign acting out of the algorithm, Abhishek. You look at the structure of an advertising piece that comes out. What does the advertising piece do? It first creates in you a sense of dissatisfaction or shame,
Right.
right? You don't have enough. You are not enough. Those are the underlying things. So it creates this kind of dissatisfaction, deprivation, and so on. And then it posits saying, this is the solution for you.
Hmm.
Okay, my favorite bugbear in this is the Axe underarm deodorant
Hmm. Hmm.
ad.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right? You look at the structure of that ad. There'll be this slightly handsome guy with lots of women hanging around him, right? And then there'll be this puny guy who walks across, and he'll look at this other fellow and obviously feel envious. And then he'll go and put underarm deodorant, and all the women will come rushing towards.
Yes.
Right now, the structure of this ad, the way it is presented,
Hmm.
yeah, if you decode it, look at the number of uh, of messages it is giving. Right. First, there's this hyper masculine person, and which nations today are hyper masculine in their presentation? Obviously, the westernized nations now with their armaments and all this kind of thing.
Yes.
Right. Second, they're they're triggering you at very animalistic level. Yeah, your sexuality, your envy. that is triggered, right? After which a solution is given, which is a completely unnecessary solution.
Right.
Okay? If you bathe every day like all good Indians do, and if you eat food which is good food, which is balanced diet, not much meat, and so on, your body will not stink. So you don't need underarm deodorant. So instead of promoting health, right, I'm
It's
promoting
16
a product
hours.
that will probably give you disease.
Hmm. Hmm.
So the whole, if you look at what is happening today in the mindset that is pushing things for the sake of consumption and for the sake of GDP,
Hmm.
is this, right? Look at the amount of money in any nation today, which through competition is forced to go into militarization, direct and indirect, 25 to 30% of GDP.
So it's intentional. You're saying it's not only benign scarcity, it's now
Not
become
benign.
intentional,
Not benign.
manipulative.
It was stated clearly by Eisenhower after the Second World War that we have to become a military industrial complex and we have to push consumption. What's the first thing Bush said
Shop.
after
Yeah.
9/11? We should go shopping. Right? So it's not that benign or whatever. It is very actively pushed.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And every American election is fought on whether the president is going to make sure that the American way of life is alive or not. Right? All you have to do is to look at one or two of the videos that is made by Story of Stuff. Brilliant videos to show
Yeah.
you how just to keep American consumption going, the whole world is being depleted
Yeah.
and exploited from. So these are not benign. These are quite clearly, I mean, today, who is paying for the Amazon forest being destroyed?
The
It's
locals.
directly
Yeah.
related to the New York Stock Exchange and who's getting money and whatever. There's an article about this.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
What does it go to fund finally? The beef industry or something like this.
Right.
Yeah. And there's been a study recently of how much of greenhouse gases are directly related to animal farms and depletion of forests and so on. So it's not as though the facts of these are not known, but there's a mind that uses science or that uses the outcome of science
Hmm.
in ways that are completely self-centered and exploitative.
Right.
And that's the mind that is being continuously pushed. I don't know if you've seen this excellent, uh, you know, little TED talk, by this lady called Malance Bart Williams.
No.
Yeah, it's a TEDx talk
Okay.
about Gambia, I think, her native country. Brilliant talk where she really puts out this whole thing. She says, "Why is my country's currency something like 30 or 50 times or whatever, or maybe 100 or something? I don't remember the number, right? Less valuable than yours when all the gold which creates the gold reserves comes from my country." And then
Right.
she goes on to analyze this, right? So these are all the direct impacts of colonization, direct impacts of creating these binaries and creating shame in the other through valorizing one side of the binary. Yeah, another brilliant book that, if you're interested, others who are interested must read, is a book called The End of Empire.
The end
It
of
is
empire.
very difficult to get in my time, but now I think with the uh, internet and things like that, it might be possible for you to get it. Okay, it was written by a guy called Brian Lapping, if I remember right, who was a BBC correspondent.
Mm-hmm.
He's written a brilliant analysis of what happened at the end of colonization. That's why the book is called End of Empire. Okay, what the British did when they went, what they did in India, in Eden, in Congo, wherever they were colonizing, and they left. Yeah, it's incredible. They set up people, okay, who will be there, who will represent their mind. Okay, so if there's a Gandhi in India, right? If Gandhiji is talking about going back and reclaiming our own greatness and things like that, they set up a Nehruvian kind of a figure. Okay, and he talks there about how he was cultivated, how it happens. Same thing happens in every nation that they let go of. They create conditions for their proxy to run the country. And at that point of time, there are papers that are written about what do we do if we get out of these places, our wealth source will be depleted and so on. So there's a whole discussion, which is, I think, called the Great Game or something. How do we set up regimes in these countries so that we will be in control? Okay. And then you see this getting echoed over and over again. When there's a problem in Iran, there's a regime change. And who gets pushed up? A Shah Pahlavi who has no connection with Iran. Why did that happen? Because Iran started, uh, uh, making all the oil fields nationalizing the oil fields, and told the people who were the individual, corporates which were owning oil fields to get out. Yeah, so a whole so-called revolution is created, all kinds of problems are created, and Iran is called the axis of evil. All they said was, let us rule ourselves the way we need to rule ourselves, and let us discover what it means to be Iranian. We have wealth, how do we use our wealth, and so on. Right? So this process of colonizing countries, creating agents of colonization in those countries, is the way the world is working today. Right? And this has to be recognized. It's a very critical thing to recognize. So if we don't recognize this, what are you going to do post-COVID? You're just
Sure.
going to fall into the same trap.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, look at the kind of things that are happening today around the vaccines. Look at the way some of these pharma companies are behaving. It is so
Yeah.
blatantly colonizing, so blatantly in competition with each other, exactly like the French would fight the British for an Indian colony. There are two pharma companies calling each other bad names, yeah, spreading all kinds of things, and false, like Indian vaccines are suddenly called bad, not by some Western press alone, by Indian press. And then you read through it, it very clearly says that this creates 50-60% antibodies, which is much, much more than enough for you to fight the disease. Right? So the entire background discourse is already pushing you into another level of colonization, another level of control.
Right, right. A question that comes to me is also that in our uh, in our scriptures and in our ancient texts,
Mhm.
how have we looked at people with this mentality? Like, are they the asuras, or they don't even exist? Like people with
No, very
mono.
clearly. No, it's very clear. Na? We have the Charuvaka,
Hmm.
who all the various other philosophies will use as a counterpoint. The Charuvakas clearly state most of these materialistic things. The
Right,
individual is important, maximizing pleasure is important, see
right,
what comes in the way of maximizing pleasure.
right.
Yeah, death is certain, death is the only reality, and so on. So they built a whole philosophical grounding on it. Okay, yeah, it's very well recorded. It's a very materialistic way of looking at the world, and there are there are some forms of looking at Indian philosophy which could be pushed into looking at it in a monotheistic way, though it hasn't happened. Yeah, and there are lots of other philosophies like Buddhist and Sikh and all of them which are middle road, which clearly say this is not right, nor is the other, where you give in to some forces and some ideas of God, they're untestable. That is also not the right way of living, and come to a middle ground. And the middle ground is always defined in polytheistic terms.
Many ways coexisting
Many
together.
ways coexist, respect them, let them flourish. This is a very beautiful story that is there in Thich Nhat Hanh's book, na? White Clouds. What's it called? Old Path, White Clouds, right? Where there are two groups. There's a group of people who come to the Buddha and say that, look, we have a problem. We have two preceptors. The two of them are fighting over, you know, issues of doctrine. This person is interpreting something. This person is interpreting something else. So he listens to them, and they ask him, what is correct. So the Buddha says, I don't know. So whoever thinks A is correct, go practice with him. Whoever thinks B is correct, go
Beautiful.
practice with
Go
him.
with it.
Come back after a year and let's see which one is working better.
Beautiful. Yeah, yeah,
Brilliant.
yeah. Very beautiful.
Yeah. And many such things. No, see the Madhyamika school has very clearly stated something which is also there in other forms of thought, no? Like the Syadvad and Chatushkoti and so on, where it says that the mind is incapable of stating a comprehensive truth. The mind is extremely limited. Reality is very, very vast. So for every possible truth that the mind can state, which is, let's say, a proposition A, it is actually immediately stating four possibilities, right? So it's stating the possibility that something completely different, like let's say opposite of A is true, right? Some combination of A and B
B.
is true, or something completely different. Both A and B are wrong, and this completely different
Truth.
truth is completely different from A and B. Now, when a thought like this is fundamental to a philosophy, okay, Shankaracharya also has a similar thing. It's called abhadita, falsification, right? So, a lot of Indian thought has this fundamental premise that there is no single truth. It's not possible for the human mind to state a single truth, right?
Interesting. Yeah, yeah.
Yoga, Buddhist philosophy explicitly state that the only evidence that you should live by is pratyaksha pramana, something that you've tested, you've looked at, which makes sense to you, which is rational. At the same time, they do not therefore say rational versus irrational. They say that human beings are a composite, right? They don't set up a perfection and say human beings are imperfect, therefore you're a sinner. They look at human beings and say human beings have avidya, and there are ways of getting rid of avidya, right? It's a much more compassionate, it's a much more realistic way of looking at human beings.
And much richer also. Sounds so much richer and
Much
nuanced.
richer.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So unless when we come out of this COVID thing, unless many of these things are understood and people see through the colonizing intent of the current civilizational thought, we're in for huge problems. And it's not as though China is outside of this frame. It might have a so-called communistic structure, but it still falls into the same. It's monotheistic, it's positivist, it's, yeah, it's gone into looking at science in a certain way. It's extremely exploitative of nature and of its own people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no difference at all. I mean, the ethnic cleansing and whatever,
Hmm.
yeah, is an ongoing reality in China today.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So what I'm hearing, Raghu, then is that the most likely thing is that this pandemic will also be co-opted by this colonizing thought, and they'll use it to push that agenda further and profit at the misery of others,
And it's
push for
not
more
them,
consumption.
Abhishek. It's not them. It's all of us who become slave to and get colonized by this idea of civilization, thinking that it is modernity, thinking that it is something superior to what we have. Yeah. See, let's just look at this carefully. Yeah. What does this monotheistic mind do? It pushes individualism.
Hmm.
It is ethics free. Okay. In Harvard, there was a huge debate of whether ethics is necessary for business or not, and they voted no, it's not necessary.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the entire monetary crash that happened was engineered by some heavyweight economic thinkers from Harvard. Okay, there's enough evidence to say that many people in Goldman Sachs and Lehman Brothers knew what they were doing, what the derivatives mean, but they pushed it anyway, and so on. Right? So these are all clear, exemplars of this monotheistic greed first thinking. Right? And what is it great at? No, it's great at taking any scientific invention, any innovation, and monetizing it immediately. What's the most important word today? Monetizing.
Yes.
How do you convert something into something utilitarian? This mind is a crazy pathological mind. It's going to destroy the earth. It's already destroyed the earth. This is the mind that says it is fine to to have at least 100 labs across the world, which is creating weapons of war through biological warfare.
Hmm.
One is just a, most advanced, and we don't know whether it was a leak or whether it was a plant, whatever. But there is no doubt at all that engineering of viruses, especially SARS viruses, has been going on for a long time. It is being patented, man. More deadly viruses are being patented. Can you imagine?
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
mind. Can human beings recognize that this kind of mind is pathological?
Hmm.
Utilitarian, individualistic mind is pathological. It's completely false. No human being is living all by himself or herself. We're all completely interdependent at very deep levels and at superficial levels. We can't speak today if we're not using something made by somebody, right? Sold by one shop, made somewhere. Every part in this computer is made in different parts of the world. So it's very
Yeah.
obvious, no? In spite of which people are caught with individualism and utilitarianism. Look at the waste that is being created. Yeah. So this has to be ended, right? So an ecologically blind, ethics free, utilitarian mind is only going to destroy the earth,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So the hope is in polytheistic thinking, right? Which is community oriented, which is ecologically responsible, yeah,
And ethical.
ethical, at a very human level, no?
Yeah. Yeah. So bringing this back, Raghu, to us, our generation and maybe also coming generations, because I often think that uh, even my generation will probably survive this, but by the time Ananya, my daughter's generation comes in, climate change will like really have hit the roof.
Oh,
Inequalities would have gone sky high. uh, so just bringing this back to where we are now, uh, just holding the question of saying that what we need then is, would you say it's seeding polytheistic thought all around, or inviting people into dialogue, or
we
what?
don't, in inviting people into dialogue for sure, we don't have to seed polytheistic thought, Abhishek. We already have
We
in
have a
Indian thought, Indian philosophy
is yeah
is fundamentally
already there,
polytheistic,
right, right.
already there. It's not only in India, it's there in Native American thought. I'm quite certain quite a lot of African, you know, what's so-called tribal thought, like Ubuntu.
Hmm.
Yeah, I am because you are. It's a fundamentally community-based idea of living.
Hmm.
So it's not exclusive to India, but it might be more prevalent. The continuity with the ancient way of thinking, the paramparas and all that are much more alive in India and in Indian forms of thought than anywhere else in the world, probably. Yeah. So examining what has happened to us is a good thing, no?
Hmm.
Yeah. So let's look at this a little carefully. I've been doing a lot of work on this with a few of us, right? Looking at what does it mean? What does it mean to claim Indianness? What does it claim? What does it
Hmm.
mean to be a Hindu? What's the difficulty of being Hindu?
Hmm.
And we think that this is true of anybody in India today wishing to claim their own heritage and build from that.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, what came up in this dialogue was that there are four, you know, broad spaces or types of discourse that are going along, which each of them represents a certain mind.
Hmm.
It's not us versus them out here. Yeah, if any Indian looks at it seriously, they'll see that all four of these are inside them, and there's a cacophony going on which has
Hmm.
to be resolved. Right. So there's one very powerful, very strong, let's say, discourse, self, mind, whatever you want to call it, which is caught with the hurt and the victimization that we've been through colonization.
Hmm.
Right? Most families I know, except those elite families which went on to the oppressor side, will tell you stories of penury. Will tell you my grandfather, my grandfather's father, great grandfather,
Hmm.
right? He lost everything. His whole life was shattered because of you know, certain problem that they had, and he ended up in penury. And my grandfather studied by going from home to home. We have the old traditions in India, which I don't think can be there now, where destitute children will live in the veranda of the house
Hmm. Hmm.
1 day a week in each house. So they'll be
Hmm.
given food
Hmm.
and they'll be given money to study. Okay, Sashi's grandfather studied like that. So there are these stories of deep pain of colonization. Okay, and India never commoditized food, they never commoditized learning.
Yes, yes,
People don't
yes.
realize this. So much
It's
of the,
very important. That's a very important
yeah.
point. Yeah.
So what happens? There is this victim self, and then there is a way in which we've internalized the shaming.
Hmm.
So we hold ourselves between these two things. We see ourselves shameful compared to a civilized, modernized West.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
hold these hurts. So there's a lot of self hate. Okay. And there is a lot of stuff that's been written about on this. Na? All, all colonized countries have been through it. The most eloquent writer on this is Franz Fanon. Yeah. Blackface, white mask, or whatever. That thing, that's the name of this thing. In Tamil, we have a way of talking about these people. It's called Karpu Soothu Vellakaran.
Hmm.
Means he's got a white face. He thinks his skin is white, but his
Hmm.
bottom is black.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
They have a
Hmm.
way of looking at themselves, talking about themselves. If you listen to many Indians talking, it's full of self-hate.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right? And then you have another space, yeah, which is reactive to this, which claims glory. Yeah, we are very glorious, we are this, we are that, but it is not dealt with the victim self. So it comes out arrogant, it comes out, claiming valor for all kinds of things, and places itself in opposition with these people who are saying you're all crap. No, we are great. This is a useless thing, but it's there in many of us, right? Now, unless this is resolved, you cannot start moving forward. Okay. And it's not easy to own up to the victim self, to own up to the hurts and what we have done to ourselves because of this. Like many discourses today will talk about so-called caste system. Now, the caste system that you see today is the bottom end of a land which has been pushed into penury, right? It's the bottom end of a land where so many institutions were there which looked after social imbalances. All of those institutions have been destroyed, right? So it's kind of, uh, uh, many civilizational thoughts where, for example, if I respect you, right, what's the best thing to do? You do your stuff, I do my stuff. Now, when there is plenty, when there is abundance, this is a very, very respectful way of being. What do you think will happen when scarcity hits you?
We fights and
Yeah, each group will start saying, okay, I have to live.
yeah, yeah.
Right? So that is what we're seeing today. Right? So an idea which had a possibility of a different way of dealing with each other. So what did we do when we said that, we will do this, we will do that? The only things that were defined as sacrosanct in the Indian context was the interface rules, ahimsa, mutual respect. Those were the critical things in a social context. Right? So now you become conservative because you want to hold on to what you have. Right? There's a very strange kind of violence that happens because of that. Hoarding will happen, grabbing will happen.
Yes.
Right? You see it all over today.
Right. So these are the three, Raghu. Fourth one you were going to
There's the
come to.
third one. We haven't yet come to the third. The
No, the
third
third is
is,
the valorizing, no? The shame and valorizing, you're saying.
that's the second.
Okay.
There's the shame and
Hurt and
victimhood,
victim. Okay. And the
valorizing
valorizing.
and victimhood.
Hmm.
Right? And then there are a set of people who, let us say, have resolved this victimhood or in some way deny this victimhood and pretend that they're all perfectly fine, good Indians, so on and so on. Many of them, when they hold India in shame, they become these great reformers, like Ram Mohan Roy and all these people, right? Well intentioned, maybe. So they try to restate the whole of Hinduism in Western terms. They start to rewrite stuff, completely colonized minds. Okay. You have to write about a rediscovery of India in frameworks that are completely alien to the Indian frameworks. So the author probably never put his foot on India. He was too rich to have had to put his foot on India. Yeah. So you find these kind of narratives which are completely westernized narratives of India. Right? And these are people who are the current elite, who hold their Indianness in shame, who continuously want to bring in some modernity. If you're not modern, you'll be held in shame. Okay. So there's a lot of discourse of this kind that's going on. Yeah. And then you have a few people who have resolved it, who have resolved the victimhood, and who hold themselves and their country in pride, like Aurobindo, for example, right? Or a Vivekananda. Right. Now, when these people look at India, they don't look at India, in very tinted ways. They're willing to say what is wrong, what is right, if you read some of Vivekananda's writings, he's extremely critical of the way we deal with each other today. Very, very strong condemnation of certain things. Plus saying, what is it that we have that is beautiful? What is it that we have that can be nourished and brought forth again as something really, really meaningful? Right? Now, unless we navigate the first three and decolonize ourselves and come to the state of the fourth, okay, I don't see how we can regenerate ourselves. And this is true of any colonized mind, not just of India. And then what happens? 1630. These so-called, elite, they have become the oppressors. So if you read, so if you read Ashish Nandi, Intimate Enemy, he's described this process very beautifully of how you internalize the enemy. Right? So what has happened, first 70 years, we've been ruled by a set of people who have envied modernity and Western ideas of governance and so on. Right? Now we have an envy of the more Chinese kind of power, centralized power structures. Both of these are colonized minds. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't understand how the so-called Hindu mind can be brought together under an idea of a monotheistic Ram. This is a colonized idea. This is a monotheistic idea. So this is also destroying the polytheistic ground of Indian thought.
Yes.
So these two guys are fighting for power. And in between this, you have all these.
Which two guys, Raghu? Sorry, there could be many
the
two
Congress
guys.
Mind. The Congress mind is the envy of the West.
Yeah.
Okay. To me, Shashi Tharoor is the prime example of this.
Yes.
Yeah. Great English, watered down idea of Hinduism. That stupid, benign idea of Hinduism where nothing was done to enable the average Indian to feel proud of his scientific history, to feel proud of his culture. Not a drop was done for any of that. Right? And then the glorification. Right. Now, these two guys are fighting. Neither of them seems to really understand or nurture what is Indian.
Yeah. Both have an unhealthy relationship with the victim and the hurtness.
I think so. The kind of histories they try to push. Yeah.
So, Raghu, the pathway to the fourth is then through confronting the first voice, right? Like to really engage with the first voice.
Really engage with the first one, get rid of self-hate. Now, see, let me just take you through what I have gone through and many of my friends. The person who woke us up to this reality was Dharampal. Right? So him, Claude Alvarez, there are a number of people there, Dr. Seshadri and so on, talked about what is the continuity of Indian thought. What was it that happened to India during the British colonizing period? And when you read some of those things, it really makes your blood boil. If you read some of the things that a guy called James Mill has written about India, he was paid by the East India Company to write these things. Terrible descriptions of India. Okay? Really, shaming. Okay? And he had never come to India really. It was a complete, this white man's burden project. Orientalism today is filled with his ideas. Okay, reflected in one form or the other. Right? Yeah. So, how do I deal with this whole self-construct? Very important. So, I have to rid myself of this. I have to understand what is real history. Who are the Indian heroic people? right? Reclaim our scientific heritage. And we've done phenomenal work in mathematics hundreds of years before anything happened in the West. Many of these things are slowly being unearthed, right? We have to, when the more we deal with this victimhood clearly, own it up and discover some healing there and really reclaim our own history, we'll stop glorifying ourselves unnecessarily, right? So the less we glorify ourselves and the more we truly discover who we are, the less we are going to try to reform ourselves into modernity, which is a deformation, right? Like Dharampal has said this many times. He said, even if you grant that the West is greater than that, we must become westernized. Are you going to lobotomize your brain and put a Western brain in your head? Right? Are you going to, suddenly cleanse your mind of thousands of years of cultural memory and put in a new memory? Right? It's not possible. Right? No civilization can do that. Yeah. So you have to go back and discover your roots and see how to nurture your roots in a way that it flowers beautifully today, contemporarily grand. Do we have the capability for that? Of course we have. If we didn't have a scientific mind, there wouldn't be a Ramanujan, there wouldn't be a Bose. Obviously, we have that. We have great philosophy, we have great psychology, we have very rich understanding of botany.
Right.
On the ground, architecture, there's so many beautiful things we have. We also have gathered a lot of crappy things. So if we dissolve these three minds, one that holds us ourselves in self-hate, the one that holds in self-glorification, and the one that is trying to reform and deform in a westernized frame, then we can start to flower. Yeah, and these seeds will be there.
Yeah, definitely, because that has been our heritage and our cultural memory. I mean, innately, that's what we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think taking off from this talk, the project of how this will actually translate into our lives, our relationships with our families, the conversations we have, I think that's what each of us needs to take up and make our own and run with it, like do it.
Yeah. And it's not just an Indian project, Abhishek. It's a project that many people in the world have to take up if the earth has to survive. Right? A lot of people from the West have to start looking at what their histories have done. How, as oppressors, what they have done. And be in conversation with people from here. There has to be a whole international dialogue which owns up to these mindsets in human beings. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The so-called monotheistic thinking is there. It's there in Africa, it's there in India, it's there all over the place, man. So
And we
how do
need
we,
to challenge. Yeah, we need to.
right? So everywhere people have to honestly go back to the roots, shed this kind of thinking completely, not glorify it. Right? The constant stuff in the West glorifying the Western psyche. And the glorified psyche that they talk about is responsible for all the ethnic violence, the genocide. They never talk about it. These books that glorify this idea of some great Western civilization never talk about the genocides, never talk about the cultural genocides. They never talk about how much they've taken from other cultures in terms of thought, in terms of so many things.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, the Americans who are sitting in America today, right? They're sitting on somebody else's wealth, somebody else's gold, somebody
Yes. Yes.
else's oil.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Raghu, one practical question that comes to me is we are in dialogue with a couple from UK. Suruchi and I are in a conversation, and they feel a deep connection to India. They feel almost at a level of sorrow that what they have as British done to India. And we're in dialogue. We just started a series of conversations,
Hmm.
which are already the first conversation itself was very difficult for us to start because it confronts some very deep pains, and just wondering if there is space for healing, reconciliation, repatriation. I don't know what will emerge from the dialogue, but in dialoguing with people from these cultures, what should that be like? Like, is there space to do that? What?
Owning up, no, the owning up of what this mindset does and how am I internalizing this mindset.
Hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So the human mind has to be cleansed of this pathology.
Which has infected all over in all domains. I think it's a cleanup. I think the other thing, Raghu, just a few more minutes. That's fine, right? We
Yeah,
have a few more minutes. No, also Gandhiji is coming to my mind in the sense of non-cooperation that he was able to do with the British. I think today then it seems like non-cooperation with this monotheistic way of thinking, right? Because it's everywhere. So the way to
everywhere.
respond it
So we
would
have
be to.
to, yeah, we have to evolve something. I don't know exactly how.
Hmm, hmm, hmm,
Yeah, yeah. Today, if I want to buy rice, I have to go to a store.
hmm,
The rice comes packed in plastic
hmm, hmm.
or whatever. Nah? Yeah,
Yeah.
I have to trust this guy that he's selling me good stuff.
Hmm, hmm,
And so many horror stories, no, of roadside vendors, how they, pump
hmm,
vegetables with color, right?
hmm, hmm,
Pharma companies, the way they're pushing suddenly this whole thing of immune boosters
hmm, hmm,
has hit the market. Organic food has hit the market. Is it truly organic?
hmm, hmm.
I think most of it is just advertising gimmick,
Hmm, 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 hmm,
and that will create its own set of problems.
hmm, hmm, hmm,
Yeah,
hmm,
already there is. I saw a few papers and things like that, na,
hmm,
saying that suddenly zinc is being pushed as an immunity booster,
hmm, hmm,
and how excessive zinc consumption could be the cause of this black fungus,
hmm, hmm, hmm,
right? And Hindustan Lever, all these people have very quickly overnight they brought out immunity boosters.
hmm,
How, man? It's obviously a advertising gimmick, no?
hmm, hmm, hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you package the same food as an immunity booster and price it 2 times as much as you did before
Hmm, hmm, hmm,
and make your money. When this kind of thinking is there, na,
hmm,
that every opportunity, every human misery, you sit there and you figure out how to gain power out of this memory or how to make money out of this out of this misery or both.
hmm.
How will that mind be changed?
Right. Whew, that sounds like quite a project itself. That sounds like a
So that is
challenging,
the dialogue.
complexing. Yeah,
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 that is
yeah.
the dialogue. I'm not interested in having a dialogue with somebody in Britain to induce guilt in that person.
Hmm, hmm, hmm,
But I certainly would like to dialogue saying, what is your mind? Are you a
hmm,
monotheistic mind?
hmm, hmm,
Can you own up to what monotheistic minds have done? Because you come
hmm.
from a culture that has valorized that for a long time.
Yes,
So
yes.
can you decolonize yourself
First. Hmm.
from that?
Yeah.
And there, it's not as though the West doesn't have any roots of polytheistic thinking. It's called pagan thinking.
Hmm. Yes. 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 True. Wow. So that's a lot, Raghu. I think this is so much to think and so much for us to churn with. And I'm so glad you have shared this. Any final thoughts that come to you? Any final
But
points you'd
the
like to
final
make?
thought was what I said just now.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
That, yeah, yeah, yeah. To have that dialogue.
how much we would like to go away from me versus you,
Hmm.
have to own up to the fact that there is a danger that monotheistic thinking, monotheistic cultures are presenting to the earth itself, to the survival of the earth itself. This thinking is posing a great, great danger, right? And it's fundamentally using everything. It's using science for self-aggrandizement. It is using cultural processes for self-aggrandizement. It is using human psychology and human fears for self-aggrandizement, right? It comes in many colors. Yeah, it comes as corporates, it comes as religion, it comes as nationality, it comes as so many colors.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it's fundamentally this.
So, with the hope that we're able to take this challenge on, all of us together, I
Some of
think,
us have to choose to do this, Abhishek.
yes, yes, absolutely. I think this is deserving of a life's work for many of us, for sure. And I think that's what's needed for today's day
And
and
we have
age.
exemplars. Right? It's not as though we're starting from scratch. We have
Yes, absolutely.
Nelson
We have
Mandela,
such,
we have Gandhiji, a
yeah,
lot of
yeah, we
people
have very tall, yeah,
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 who have walked this path, and it's not a completely new thing.
true, true, true. Beautiful, Raghu. Thank you so much for this conversation and
Welcome.
uh, really holding the intent that this conversation goes and becomes a source material for many, many discussions and sparks a lot of inquiry, a lot of action, a lot of churning. Just want to thank you for sharing so much from your heart and making it accessible. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.